Hello, church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. Excuse me. This is God's Feeding Station. It's nice to be with you again this week as we continue our message series in the book of Isaiah. We are in Isaiah 10, 5 and 11, 5 through 11, and the nation of Assyria now comes into focus. They come into focus for God's judgment. And we're going to talk about why that is. Assyria is a key figure, as we've been talking about for a while now, 30 some odd messages in this series so far. We're only in chapter 10. But it's a key figure in the chastening that God has brought upon Israel and upon Judah. But eventually, the hunter is going to become the hunted. And it becomes the hunted because it has made the same mistakes that Israel and Judah have made. They have become prideful. They may be the destroyer now, but they do not hold the destiny of any nation in her hands. That belongs to God. God is and always will be supreme. And it's to him Assyria should be looking to, Israel and Judah should be looking to, the nations of today and the people of the day should be looking to. Because God is always there. He's always with us. He always has a hand in the workings and the doings of our lives. And to ignore that is to do so at our peril. So, as we talked about, as other writers in the Bible talk about, God brings trials and sufferings and chastenings and judgment upon us for his purposes. But in those times, even though we may feel like he's abandoned us, he hasn't. He is with us through the dips and the valleys as he is with us on the mountaintops. And so, while Assyria, is coming with her weapons of war, she's only doing so because God commands it. She thinks she's doing it of her own will and of her own power. But God is the one who is allowing this to happen because he has a purpose behind it. And unless Assyria bows in obedience to him, as Israel and Judah should have, she will suffer the same fate as Israel and Judah. So, we begin in verses 5 and 6. Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger. The staff in their hands is my fury. Against a godless nation I send him, and against the people of my wrath I command him, to take spoil and seize plunder, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. Serious, pretty serious stuff. Assyria is acting on God's behalf at his direction. But the woe at the beginning of verse 5 spells trouble. Assyria will face judgment and the same type of destruction that she's wielding on Israel and Judah because she fails to recognize that she's an instrument of God. She is being wielded. She is the tool in the hands of the Creator. And for us, maybe, definitely for the Hebrews of the time, it was hard for them to understand how God could use a nation like Assyria who didn't believe in him, didn't trust in him, didn't obey him, and was looked upon as godless and vile and profane. But Isaiah is telling the Jews, you, Israel, and you, Judah, you are the godless, you are the vile, you are profane. And Assyria is being used by God to punish you because of your pride. Because everything and everyone is available to the Creator, to God, to use as he sees fit. I mean, even the most evil person can be used by God, if for nothing else, to show how bad evil is. And again, it doesn't mean God is the puppet master. It means, as we said in the beginning, that God, he's present with us always, and he will bring out of everyday life the things that will serve his goodness and his purposes. But with all of this, there's accountability. And this is the thing that Israel and Judah doesn't understand. Right? Remember, well, we've talked about it a lot, but that Israel, what was Israel's purpose in being in covenant with God? To be an example to the world, to show the world what it was like to be in covenant and to walk lockstep and to live under the umbrella of God's rule, of God's grace, of God's mercy, of God's love, according to God's will. That was her purpose. She was to be a light unto the world. And in her mind, she considers herself of a higher moral standard than Assyria. Well, if that's the case, and because Israel is in covenant with God, she has farther to fall. Jesus says in Luke 12:48, everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required. And from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. God has entrusted being an example to the world, to Israel. So much is expected of them. And because of their pride, again, they have farther to fall. So continuing on in verse 7, but he does not so intend, and his heart, speaking of Assyria, does not so think. But it is in his heart to destroy and to cut off nations, not a few. Assyria doesn't see herself as a tool of God. And the thing here is that it's not necessary to be, or it's not necessary to know the commander to be commanded. We've all had a period in our lives where we've been the tool of somebody. We've been used by someone. Sometimes we've known it. Sometimes we haven't known it. But we've all been played at some point in our lives. And you don't have to know you're being played, or you don't have to know by whom you're being played in order to be played. And sometimes you can be used for good, sometimes not so good. And that's the thing with Assyria. They don't know that God's commanding them. But it doesn't matter. They're still being commanded by God. Because Assyria's purpose here is to conquer a prideful nation. But see, Assyria doesn't see it that way. They see themselves as victors of their own devices. Their conquests are due to their own achievements. And the thought of being part of a larger purpose, especially at the hands of a God that they don't know or understand, it's the farthest thing from their minds. And that type of mindset, accepting that thing of being used by God or being used by somebody, that is a blow to the human psyche. Because the world teaches that we make our own way. We climb the ladder of success. We work hard at a sport or a musical instrument, in my case, or being good at your job, or being good at a craft or an art, whatever it may be. And the world says, the achievements that we gain, the recognition we gain is due to our achievements, or they're due to our own hard work. We've made our own way. We deserve the credit. I deserve this, that, and the other thing because I've worked for it. And I've done it on my own. But the bottom line is, nothing that we have is on our own. Everything that we have comes from God. Everything. And so Assyria believes her wealth and power have given her the right to conquer the world. And nothing can be farther from the truth. But now we get an insight into what Assyria is thinking. Verses 8 through 11. For he says, again, the king of Assyria, are not my commanders all kings? Is not Calno like Carchemish? Is not Hamath like Arpad? Is not Samaria like Damascus? As my hand has reached to the kingdoms of the idols, whose carved images were greater than those of Jerusalem and Samaria, shall I not do to Jerusalem and her idols as I have done to Samaria and her images? Right? Remembering Samaria is the center of life in the northern kingdom, Israel. Right? Isaiah tells us now how far off the rails the ruler of Assyria has gone. He's far from understanding that he is God's servant, because he's got all these chiefs and mayors and of all these little towns that he's conquered over the years, over his reign. Tens of hundreds. Right? They all thought themselves kings. They all thought themselves great rulers. And yet the king of Assyria has mastered all of them. So I've conquered however many, countless little, kings in their own minds. Hezekiah is just one more. And he goes back and he lists them. Like, I've conquered all these guys, this guy and that guy and that guy and that guy. What's Hezekiah? He's another name on the list. And Israel and Judah, two more nations, two more cities, Samaria, Jerusalem, just two more to check off. And as for thinking or submitting to serving Israel's God, again, in the mind of the ruler of Assyria, hey, I've conquered all these other nations who had all these worthless idols and prayed to all these other gods. Their gods didn't save them. Israel's God, the northern kingdom, right, didn't save Samaria. What makes anybody think that the God of Judah is going to save them? And there wasn't there wasn't the smallest consideration. There wasn't any inkling of any possibility that the God of Israel was different than all the other gods, all the other false gods of all the other nations. And the other thing was, the Hebrews had no image of their God. Right? They were commanded to not make any graven images of their God. And so there's not even something for the king of Assyria to look at to get an idea of what this God looks like. What is he like? And, Israel's even struggled getting their heads around worshiping their own God, right? They are close, they're walking with God, then they sin and they fall away, and then they turn and repent and draw close again, and then sin and fall away and turn and repent. Through history, Israel has had a hard time grasping hold of and keeping hold of their own God. And how is this Assyrian king, who has no idea what this God is like, why should I even fear him? I don't even know what he looks like. So the thing for Assyria, the rude awakening, the Gatorade bucket at the end of the game here is going to be finding out that they are subject to this God they claim to be master over. And they are going to discover how real he is. Now, another, I guess, a worldly thought process is that when we are in the midst of chastening, suffering, when we're in the valley, sometimes we feel like God's abandoned us. We feel like he's left us there to flounder on our own. And in the time of Isaiah, the thought was that, well, God must be on the side of the victor here, which is why Israel had such a hard time believing that he would use Assyria to bring judgment upon them. But see, God's not a prisoner of history, and he's not beholden to the traditions of the world. He's not the alter ego of the victor or the vanquished. He will use, as we said, whomever and whatever he needs to use to get his point across, even if it means Judah being exiled to Babylon, right, which he warned them about before it all happened. Because he is a God that guides events to his good and his plan of salvation. So he holds all creation in his hands, all of it. But neither his creation or the things that are at work here, they don't rule him. They don't guide him. The circumstances was the word I was looking for. The circumstances don't dictate, right, how God behaves. God will dictate, as in this case, the circumstances, so that his point of getting Israel and Judah to understand their sin and hopefully repent and turn back to him, that's accomplished. So he is not the possession or the manifestation of his creation. Quite the opposite. So while Israel and Judah are about to feel the rod that is Assyria, Assyria is still a rod, and that's all she is in the hand of God. And Assyria is subject to the will of the God who wields that rod. So again, Assyria suffers from pride, and it is a sin that we all come face to face with at some point in our lives. She behaves as if there is no one true God. And she exalts herself just as Judah did and just as Israel did to the place that's reserved for the creator of the universe. Excuse me. Her worldly power doesn't make her immune from destruction. And she's still answerable to the God whose power and glory is greater than hers. And all the other nations of the world today would do well to learn this lesson of Assyria and her pride.